Hey everybody, it's Mark Coxon here with the XTG podcast, and today we're doing a segment called Meet the Technologist. So if you don't know, XTG has these amazing creative technologists that we use to explore the art of the possible, and today I wanted to invite my first technologist guest to the show, Chase McCloud. How are you, Chase?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me.
Hey, you and I have known each other way before we worked together at XTG. So I'm happy to have you as my first guest. I feel like it takes a little of the pressure off.
I would agree, man. I would agree. Yeah, we've been connected for quite a while. It's an interesting way that we met and have stayed connected over the years. I've enjoyed it. And
Yeah.
now we get to work. It's awesome.
Yeah, it is an industry where that is about people, and that's really why I wanted to do this show, because I wanted to introduce, our team, our internal team, and our customers to the people that they get to work with when they come over and do a project with XTG. So your role, the title a little different, creative technologist. Can you tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about what that role is in your eyes?
Yeah, absolutely. The way the role works for me, it's interesting because it's a different title. It's something we like to talk about how XTG exists in a very unique way in general because of our birth and kind of our existence within a larger AV integration firm like AVI SPL. I think it's really interesting because what we do is so different, but also so similar to what our partners and our customers, truly our local offices and the teams we work with to deliver our projects on what they do, right? But we just kind of exist in a different space. We understand that XTG, experience technology, it was created specifically to serve a segment of the world and of the corporate industry that is around creating like really memorable moments and really impactful experiences beyond just big screens or large meetings or really technical camera systems in a boardroom. It becomes like, how do we squeeze the most creativity out of what we're doing with technology here? How do we tell stories with the technology? So because that exists in such a weird manner, roles like ours have to exist as well to support that and to make it like successful long term. So the idea of a creative technologist is like, we are essentially we're even categorized kind of as like a design engineer, which you would expect a design engineer to be if you're going to meet with someone to design a system. We do the same thing, but like to lean way further into the artful side of things, like the coloring of it all, the shading of it all. Like, what does it look like? What does it feel like? Why does it exist? What is the reason for it existing? How does it connect back to the people in the audience that we're really writing the story for? Those are the things that we are tasked with thinking about and kind of ultimately coming up with ideas and then finding ways to communicate those ideas to people. I always say like I'm doing my job really well and I'm becoming a really good creative technologist if people are getting excited about ideas that are not only unique and thoughtful, I think in design, but also creatable and buildable and sustainable and executable, and then delivered over time and at scale across the world, and also supported by a company like AVI SPL and XTG. So my role is to kind of start that ball rolling down the hill and really come up with some of the really fun ideas that might actually become some of our awesome creations.
Yeah, I love that take, and I often joke that our IO at XTG is impact and outcomes as opposed to inputs and outputs. Now, of course, that has to translate, like you said, right? You can have this great, big, amazing idea, but if you can't actually build it or you can't support it long term, then it's of no value to anyone, right? Like cutting edge can be painful. So how do we actually kind of decouple those two things to really get the impact that you're looking for, but to do it in a way that can be built and can be supported?
Yeah.
Knowing you a little bit, I know you're into physics, you're into art, you're into music, you're kind of a tinkerer and a maker at heart with different computer programs and 3D printing and all of these things that you like to do. How do you leverage those other passions that you have when you're thinking about projects? Like, how does that come into play when you're talking to a client about, maybe a briefing center or a museum or something that they're looking to create this exceptional experience around?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say like directly how it impacts, I'd say that like having interests and just in general being curious, being of a curious mind, wanting to kind of understand things a bit better, or ask questions that maybe don't typically get asked, or ask things just for the sake of getting more information out there or squeezing things out of something. Those are people the commonality that I see with XTG and with our team is that the people that get hired here are all highly skilled, but also they also have some part of them that exists and does really well in that world. It's kind of a requirement to exist in the experiential segment of audiovisual in general because of its the nature of what it is. It's so rooted in creativity and art that comes with its inherent inconsistencies or wild ideas, things that have never been done before, things that have never been engineered before. So the unthinkable or the seemingly unbuildable become potentially buildable because you have people asking questions like that. So I think like being interested in those other things are just kind of natural byproducts of kind of being of that kind of mind. So my interests, yeah, I like to learn about physics. I'm a very curious person about how things work, but I'm also more artful person. I love to play music and I love to write and I love to write poetry, or the part of my job that I love doing the most is actually crafting a lot of the copy and text that I get to put into presentations to help convey the idea. Like it's fun to make the picture sometimes and to get the idea in general, but to me, like using as few words possible to then kind of get a point across, but do it in a really eloquent way. Like that's success to me. And so I think I see the most fun in my job is like crafting those creatively and thoughtfully for clients and for people or for customers within our internal organization, whatever, to know that like the message got across and the message was received or that can carry, that kind of thing carry on. That's how I measure success with it. So it kind of just comes like kind of tangentially with it. It's definitely impacted some projects in the past. Like I've absolutely come up with ideas that have been related to like, oh, I was learning about early on when I worked with you, we talked about using electromagnetism to do some sort of ferromagnetic fluid art piece, and really more of a scientific kind of showing the tide between the moon and the ocean, which is really cool, crazy concept, but also like born out of because I are interested in those things outside of like my professional life. And then indirectly, it just it helps keep inspiration up, I think, in general. If you're doing things like that, it keeps the creative juices flowing. When you work in a traditional engineering role, as a design engineering role, there's a level of creativity there, but there's really a lot of like, you're looking for things that are going to be the best and most efficient design and something that's the goal is to be efficient, as repeatable, as dependable for an AV system. And that same kind of thing applies to what we do, but I just engage the other side of the brain for it. Now it's about how can I be the most thoughtful and the most evocative and the most connected with this idea or this color that I pick or this screen size or the way I angle this thing. And so I just apply it in a different way. So I don't spend my time doing the same things, but I am still kind of achieving the same goal for just a whole different part of the industry.
Yeah, I love that. I will testify to you. You mentioned the ferromagnetic fluid, and I loved that idea, and I was disappointed that didn't come to fruition. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about something like that in a minute. But another one that we worked on early on that I don't think ever got built either. We were looking at a historic hotel lobby, and you had picked out like a lot of like you knew there used to be a ticker board across the street, and you were like, what if we did something kind of like analog flip ticker board here? What if we took this atomic clock in the back? There was a really prominent clock hanging from the ceiling, and somehow you figured out that the clock in the back of the room was actually like this one of the world's first atomic clocks or something like that. And you're like, we should highlight that piece. And you kind of came up with all these historical pieces within that lobby that you thought would be interesting to feature. And none of that info was given to you. So I was always very impressed that you had like dug into like, what is this space? What is the historic significance of it? Where were people coming from when they were traveling here? And what would that have looked like, 30, 40, 100 years ago versus today? And should we play up some of that? So I love that, that curious mind that you bring to the table.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I mean, you're right. That was another one that it was just fun. It was one of the early ones that I started working on with XTG. And one of the things I like kind of had to like the transition from doing a traditional engineering job and then kind of getting into this leaning into the heavy creative space and kind of helping come up with initial ideas or concepts or things like that. Like getting to know who the audience is, getting to know the subject is like really, really important. So that for that one was like lots of YouTubing and diving on the internet of like, what do we know about it? It's a historic place already. So there's all this story that can be uncovered and peeled back that's like it wouldn't necessarily be the inspiration necessarily. We want to renovate our lobby, so we might put no signage here or some things here. But when you really kind of try to break beyond that box and say, well, who am I actually looking at? And as soon as I started to peel that onion, it was layers of like these really, really crazy stories, some wild ones that really helped drive those ideas of like, what if we projection mapped onto that clock? That clock was, like you said, it was the first, it wasn't, I forget what they say, it was the first, I think, distributed, it was like the first master clock for a building like that. And they had the master clock driving all the alarm clocks in the rooms. It had a really cool tie to a mystery about, an actual death that happened in the hotel back in the 20s. It was really, really interesting. And it's been featured in that lobby kind of in like a very historic and just where it originally was way. And so projecting light onto that and maybe making it a part of the story and a historical story in the lobby, there's this really incredible story to tell about where they came from, what they've been through, why this building is so prominent. So yeah, that's the fun things, or things like that are the things I'm looking for when I'm talking to people. I'm trying to find where is that little nugget. So if I can find anything out about you online, I'm going and looking for it. Of
In a responsible, ethical way, for sure.
course.
Yeah, of course, of course. Well, hey, we've been talking a little bit about this ideation process and projects, and obviously we want to be sensitive to customer names and to very specific projects because some of those are covered under NDA or some of those aren't really ours to share. But as far as like an idea that may have ended up on the cutting room floor, some technology application that you had come up with and pitched, and like you said, you even get involved in pitching these ideas, right? Which is another part of the job that I think is really, really amazing. You have to not only be an engineer and be an artist, but you actually have to be a communicator because you're asked to come in and communicate these ideas. We don't just hand these over to somebody in business development and have them pitch. Like we have you as technologists really share the impetus behind your idea. So you have a
Yeah.
lot of investment in these. What is something that hit the cutting room floor? What is something that somebody didn't pursue that you would love to see someone else maybe pick up someday? Just from an application standpoint, like a really crazy cool idea you had come up with.
I mean, that's yeah. I hate that we teased it earlier, but I mean that it's got to be, or at least one of them has to be the idea of the ferromagnetic fluid, some sort of electromagnetic example or diorama model that's going to show the different, the effects of the moon and then on the tide, and using ferromagnetic fluid to actually be what pulls in. That seemed like obviously was early concept ideas we put out there, and it was a very fun idea. I had a lot of ideas in my brain of how that might be constructed, how we might be able to test that, what kind of how many layers of magnets and where they might need to be hidden within this model in order to get like an even flow of fluid to make it represent the flow of. So all those things are like TBD, but if I think it's got one of those nuggets of like it could be a really, really fun blend of technologies to show something that's, in a way using other technologies to kind of showcase, the effects of gravity, which is something that you can't really showcase on a scale that we can understand. So,
Yeah,
but that
yeah. To give a little more depth to that, I think one of the really cool things, the reason that idea was so great was because we were working for a client who wanted to emphasize space and the ocean were kind of
yeah,
two pieces they wanted to showcase based on their location in the world. And you had this really cool idea of like how heavenly celestial bodies actually influence the tides,
yeah,
and kind of coming up with this idea of an analog and digital activation where you potentially have a moon or some kind of model of a moon that's actually creating an orbit above this pool, and then the pool is responding to the location of that moon as it moves and pulls tides here and there, which was, I just
yeah,
loved that idea. I'm with you. Like if there was one that you and I had done together, that's one that I think would be really cool because it's not all just screen based, right? And you could projection
yeah,
map the moon and the phases, like the face of the moon on it, and do those kind of things on the object. Like you could use some really cool effects on the pool and on the fluid and things. But the whole idea of actually moving liquid around with magnets to mirror the object above it was really, really interesting to me. And I wish they would have pursued that as like an art project. It would have been just such a cool thing.
agreed. Yeah, I have a couple of ideas in my mind of like how cool it could look, what scale it could be at, how you could interact with it, and dial things up when it comes to the distance and where we are in our orbit, and or the moon's orbit to us, kind of. So yeah, it could have been really fun if there ever gets there. It would be awesome to see somebody try and do something like that. But yeah,
Well, great. Well, maybe, hey, maybe somebody will watch this, learn a little bit about Chase, hear about ferromagnetic fluid and orbits and tides, and want to pick it up and do something with it. Maybe it's a museum client. Maybe it's Blue Origin's been in the news with Katy Perry the last couple of days. Maybe it's them. Maybe they want to do something cool. So, well, hey, man, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this and sharing a little bit about you and what you do, and how you see your role here at XTG. And for anybody that wants to reach out to Chase or myself, feel free. If you're internal to AVI-SPL, you can find us easily in Teams. If you're external, we're sharing this externally. I'll put our LinkedIn handles here in the post so that you can connect to us easily on LinkedIn as well. And we'd love, you probably can tell, Chase probably would love just to talk to you about your crazy ideas, even if they do end up on the cutting room floor at some point.
right.
Right. Well, hey, Chase, thanks so
Awesome.
much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, man. It was great to hang out.
Appreciate it. All right, y'all. Take care. And until next time, we'll have another episode of Meet the Technologist.